Hi, and welcome back to my channel, Learning Biology with Dr. Vanessa. In today's video, we are going to take a look at the difference between the innate and adaptive immunity. If you saw my other video on the overview of the immune system, I do touch base on both of these immunities. However, in this video, we're going to delve a bit deeper, looking at the key players for each one. If you take a look in an immunology textbook, you'll notice that innate and adaptive immunity each have an entire chapter devoted to them. There's a lot that goes on. However, for this video, I'm going to condense it and we're going to talk about very specific players to give you a better understanding of how innate and adaptive immunity differ. Now let's first take a look at innate immunity. Innate immunity refers to this immunity that you're born with. Sometimes it's referred to as inborn immunity. It refers to all of these defenses that are basically always present, and they are there to act in case something foreign comes into the body. Now, because of this, innate immunity is a rapid response. It is fast acting, but it is also non-specific. Let's take a closer look at the various components of innate immunity. The innate immunity consists of things that we're born with. It's a non-specific immunity. The first line of defense of innate immunity is the skin and mucous membranes. Now, if we take a closer look at skin, the surface of skin, the epidermis, is made of very tightly, closely packed keratinocytes. These skin cells provide a natural barrier against the outside world, so it prevents things from coming in, and therefore it acts as a very physical barrier. Now, obviously, if it gets cut or burnt, etc., we remove some of that physical barrier that we have. Those skin cells also continuously remake themselves and slough off. This allows for the skin to clear itself of any bacteria on the surface. The sweat glands produce sweat, which go onto the surface of skin, and this allows for an acidic pH on the skin surface, which also prevents bacterial growth. And the sweat itself also helps to wash away any bacteria on the surface. So all of these components together really help to keep bacteria off the surface of the skin and from penetrating further. Again, like I said before, if the skin gets cut or burnt, etc., now we're opening that up and allowing that to come in. Within the skin itself, there are also cells that are called dendritic cells, and these cells are part of the immune system. These dendritic cells, also known as Langerhans cells, are found within the epidermis of the skin. They are the first line of defense if anything were to breach the actual skin surface. These cells are part of the innate immune system as they are able to capture antigens and then display them on their surface. However, they play an integral role in activating the adaptive immune system as well. Mucous membranes are also another part of the first line of defense. We see mucous membranes in the respiratory tract, nasal passages, and gastrointestinal tracts. Mucus is important because it can trap different pathogens, particles, dust, etc., as it comes into this area. So if something doesn't land on the skin, one of the other first lines of defense, but we breathe it in, inhale it in, etc., these mucous membranes can help by attaching these different particles. Now, mucus is a very sticky type of substance, and because it is sticky, it is capable of trapping these foreign particles. We also have tiny hairs associated with these respiratory passages, and those hairs can help push the mucus that has these different dust particles trapped, and it can push it to different areas. So for example, if we get something trapped within our nasal passages, in that mucus that's there, the cilia or the hairs in that area can push that back towards the back of the throat. We cough that up and either spit it out or we swallow it into the digestive tract. It will get broken up. Same thing if we inhale that into our lungs. Those cilia actually help to push those things up. So those cilia move in an upper direction. The cilia within the nose move in a backward direction. They're both moving those particles to the throat, where again we can either cough that up or we can swallow that into the digestive tract to be broken up in the acidity of the stomach. There are some other things in play with this first line of defense, such as urine is very acidic, and so as it passes through the urethra, it keeps that free from bacteria growing in those areas because of the acidity that's involved there. In the stomach, the gastric juices are very acidic, again helping to prevent the growth and also break down any pathogens that may come into that area. In the eyes, we have the lacrimal apparatus, which is making tears. Tears also have some antimicrobial properties to help flush away and trap different particles that may come in through the eyes. And in the mouth, we also have saliva that's going to help wash those microbes from the surfaces of the teeth and help to remove anything that may be there. Though this first line of defense is a great measure to help keep things from entering the body, obviously things do and are able to pass through. So now what about our second line of defense? What do we have as a defense system in case things do pass through? So let's talk about this second line of defense, again, still within this innate system, this non-specific system that we're born with. So what happens if microbes, antigens, pathogens, etc. are capable of passing that first line of defense? We have a second line of defense, and these are internal defenses. They include natural killer cells, phagocytes, inflammation, fever, and antimicrobial proteins. So let's go through and talk about each one and the differences between them. Natural killer cells are actually a type of white blood cell, or lymphocytes specifically. They make up about 5 to 10% of those lymphocytes. We find them in the spleen, lymph nodes, and red bone marrow. Natural killer cells have the ability to attack any body cells that display abnormal or unusual plasma membrane proteins. That means if a body cell is displaying something that is not a self-protein, these natural killer cells will bind to that target cell, and it will cause that natural killer cell to release toxic granules, killing that target cell. Natural killer cells then have the ability to kill a wide variety of infected body cells and also certain tumor cells. Now, this is a very non-specific type of immunity because they're just recognizing that something is wrong, attaching, releasing their granules, and killing that target cell. Phagocytes, another type of cell in innate immunity, is a specialized cell that is capable of performing phagocytosis. Phagocytosis is when a cell ingests those microbes or other particles, such as cellular debris. There are two major types of phagocytes. They are neutrophils and macrophages. Macrophages can be wandering, which means they move around to various places of the body, or they can be fixed macrophages, which means they stay where they are. In either case, macrophages are capable of ingesting material. This could be foreign material like antigens, bacteria, etc., or it could even be cellular debris. So a cell died next to it and there's particles around, it can also eat that up. So they are the cleanup cells. They do help to keep things clean and free of cellular debris, but they're also capable of ingesting things like pathogens, microbes, etc. Phagocytosis itself occurs in 5 different phases. The first phase is referred to as chemotaxis, and this is where phagocytosis begins because there's a chemical attraction between those different phagocytes to a different site of damage. So it can be basically called to that area by this chemical attraction. So that's the first thing that needs to happen. The second thing that happens is adherence, and this is where the phagocyte actually adheres to that particle or the foreign material, etc. The third stage is going to be where ingestion occurs, and this is where the plasma membrane of that phagocyte actually extends these projections that are referred to as pseudopods, and wraps them around that microbe. And it does this in this process called ingestion. And when these pseudopods basically fuse around there, it creates what's called a phagosome. So the phagosome is going to be this sac that is surrounding whatever it is that phagocyte is eating. So a microbe or a piece of a cell, etc. That is going to be referred to as a phagosome. And it will then bring that phagosome into itself. And this is the fourth phase of phagocytosis, which is called digestion. So it brings that phagosome into itself, and it's actually going to bond with what is called, it fuses with what is called a lysosome. So phagocytes actually have a lot of lysosomes within them. You learn about the different parts of the cell and how some specialized cells have a lot more of some components than others. Well, phagocytes actually have a lot of lysosomes in there, and that's because when they bring in this phagosome within them, then it's going to fuse with that lysosome in this process of digestion, and that lysosome is going to release all those digestive enzymes that it has, like lysozyme and other things, and it's going to release that into the phagosome. So they actually come together and they form what's called a phagolysosome, right? Where they come together, it releases all those enzymes, and it helps to break up whatever it just brought in there. So the final phase is going to be the killing phase, and this is where these enzymes that are now surrounding whatever it brought in basically kills them. So it breaks this up into all these different components, and now those are basically referred to as residual bodies. At this point, those components can be spit out. They are not harmful, or different parts can be shown on the surface of these cells if it is an antigen, etc., and that will help to activate different parts of the immune system. That's kind of an important idea for later on in later videos. I'm not going to get into that too detailed right now, but if you were wondering what may happen with that, it can be expressed on the cell surface. It can be put on the cell surface to be seen, or it can just be spit out. Another form of defense of the innate immunity is inflammation. Inflammation is actually an innate response that the body has to tissue damage. There are 4 different characteristic signs and symptoms of inflammation. They are redness, heat, swelling, and pain. The purpose of inflammation is that it is basically an attempt to dispose of whatever microbes, toxins, or any other foreign material that could be at the site of injury. The body wants to be able to keep this at that site and to prevent it from further entering into the body. So in order for this to happen, the inflammatory response actually involves 3 basic activities. They are 1, vasodilation and increased permeability of the local blood vessels. 2, the emigration of phagocytes, we just talked about phagocytes, and then 3, chemotaxis and microbial attack. So let's delve a little bit further and talk about what's really happening in each one of these 3 activities. The first one is vasodilation and increased permeability of local blood vessels. So something has happened. Some injury has happened to an area, perhaps a cut, right, where that area has been broken. And so in that case, there's going to be white blood cells, platelets in that area. White blood cells are involved in the immune response to help prevent bacteria. Platelets are going to be the response to clotting of blood in that area of injury. They're going to come over to that area and they're going to start to release something called histamine. What histamine does is it actually causes vasodilation and increased permeability of the blood vessels in that area. So it's going to cause those blood vessels in that area to become very leaky. So the histamine that's being released there causes those blood vessels to be leaky, and what that's going to do, it's going to allow certain substances to start coming out of the blood into that area. What are we going to see coming into that area? Well, some fluid. We're also going to see some different types of white blood cells that are going to be able to move through there, and that's what happens in the second activity, which is the emigration of phagocytes. Now that we have allowed this increased permeability by the release of histamine, we can allow more phagocytes to come to this area. Remember those cells that eat things? We want them there because we want them to help clean up any microbes that may be in that area. So they do this by the process of emigration. What happens is they, as they're in the blood vessel itself, they start to stick to the inner surfaces of the blood vessels, and then they can squeeze through the wall of the blood vessels to go into the damaged area. And that process is what we refer to as emigration. So we have more phagocytic type cells that can eat things coming to that area. Finally, we have the chemotaxis and microbial attack within that area. When we have this emigration that's happening, those neutrophils are going to be the first ones that show up. But then eventually monocytes show up in more number afterwards, drawn in by the chemotaxis. And so those monocytes that are there that can become macrophages are going to help to eat up anything in that area. And the chemotaxis that's happening, the cell signaling that is happening between cells, is allowing those monocytes to transform into macrophages and eat up in that area. Now, you'll notice that after a few days, if you ever get a cut, etc., you may see some pus that's in there. That pus is all of these cells coming to this area, eating things, trying to remove any microbes, and so that's some cellular debris from that area. And so it's always natural to have some pus. Obviously, if something got infected and it was much more than the immune system can handle, then that area is going to pus much, much more than normal. Some notes on some other things that can be released other than histamine are prostaglandins. These are going to be released by the damaged cells that are there, and that intensifies the effects of histamine and also help to stimulate more emigration of phagocytes. So obviously the greater the tissue damage, the greater this process is going to be. Leukotrienes are also produced by white blood cells, and they're going to work to increase capillary permeability and also to attract more phagocytes. Again, the more area that is damaged by the injury, the greater this process is going to be, the greater the inflammation is going to be, and inflammation is going to be caused by this fluid and cells going to that area. So then you also see local redness, heat in that area as these things are happening. Again, the greater the injury, the more we're going to see this. Along with this, if this has affected a blood vessel also in this injury, right, and not just the surface of the skin, but it's gone deeper and it's affected a blood vessel, then we'll also see blood clotting factors come into play too, where there's lots of platelets, and then we can have that whole clotting cascade that would happen. That's something that you talk about in the blood chapters and talk about that clotting cascade. So you can have that in conjunction with this inflammatory response. Fever, as scary as fever sounds, is actually part of the innate immune system. Now, the purpose of the fever is that it actually elevates the temperature above normal. So we can actually have a little bit of fever in the case of inflammation. So again, if you've ever cut yourself and you felt that area, you felt that it is much more warm than the rest of the body. That's creating a local fever. We can also have a systemic fever. Now, the purpose of the fever, or the reason the body creates this fever, is that it's a very common event in infection, okay, whether bacteria or viral or local. And what it does is it's going to help to when the body temperature is elevated, it helps these cells in the body to work much more quickly. It intensifies effects of different things like interferons. It helps these cells get to these areas much quicker. And then it speeds up these body reactions that are also happening as the temperature increases a little bit. And one of the other things that it does is it helps to inhibit the growth of certain microbes. So certain microbes like to grow at specific temperatures. If it's a little bit hotter than that, they just don't grow as effectively, and so it helps to do that. So running a low-grade fever is actually a good thing because it's the body's innate natural defense to help fight off some of these things. Obviously, fever can be a positive feedback if you have heard about that. And what that means is it can continuously go in the same direction. So fever can get greater and greater and greater, and then it can become dangerous if there is not medical intervention to help lower that. So low-grade fever for some time is actually a good thing and the body's way of defending. But again, if it gets too high, that is not good and medical intervention needs to occur. The last major component of the innate immune system that we'll talk about are antimicrobial proteins. Antimicrobial proteins are found in various fluids of the body, and the purpose of them, like they sound, is to discourage microbial growth. Interferons, which I just mentioned before, are actually proteins that are produced by cells that become infected with virus. So if a virus goes into a cell, that cell will produce and release interferons. Once those interferons are released to neighboring cells, and they go to neighboring cells, then those neighboring cells will actually start to produce antiviral proteins that block viral replication. So this is a natural defense to help protect those cells that have not yet been infected with virus to not get infected with virus. The complement system is a group of proteins that are found within the blood plasma that are normally inactive, meaning they're not really doing anything. But when they're activated by the immune system, they are actually going to work to complement, which is why they're called the complement system, or enhance certain immune reactions. So they're going to really intensify the immune reactions that are occurring. And this is because this system is going to basically cause the cytolysis or the bursting of cells. And in this case, it can cause the bursting of microbes. It can promote phagocytosis. It can contribute to inflammation. It can just make all these inner workings of the innate immune system greater. It can also work in the adaptive immune system. And then this is going to cause more cells to come to that area. So wherever there's going to be a greater response, other cells are going to come to that area to help work against this. So that basically concludes the different things that we see in innate immunity. And so again, you can see these are things that we're born with. They're not specific, but they're going to create some sort of immune response to help keep the body in check, to not allow things to take over. Now, because this system is nonspecific, it works very quickly. But what happens if that cut is greater, that injury is greater, or the amount of virus particles that came into the body are greater? What comes into play next if the innate immunity just can't control it? And that's where we take a look at the adaptive immunity. Now, because the adaptive immunity is a specific immunity, it takes a bit longer for it to come into play. So the purpose of the innate immunity is to keep it at bay or to hold it off and maybe get rid of it. But if it can't, then the adaptive immune system is going to start doing its job. This video is actually a bit longer than I wanted it to be. As you can see, innate immunity is very involved. Adaptive immunity is actually more involved. And this is without me even going into the nitty-gritty of each component. I'm just trying to get you to understand them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to end this video here, and I'm going to come back and I'm going to do part 2, adaptive immunity, and we're going to take a look at adaptive immunity, and then you can kind of compare them together to see how they work. And then maybe later on I'll come back and I'll do even more nitty-gritty of each of the different systems so that you can kind of understand that better. I do hope that this helped you to understand the innate immune system. I'm going to come back and talk about the adaptive immune system so that you can compare them and understand how they work. Thank you so much for watching my videos. If you enjoy this content and want it to keep coming, please support me by subscribing, clicking on the notification, that little bell up on top so that you never miss out on a new video. Thank you so much, and I will be back with adaptive immune system in the next video I release. Thank you.